ready?
Okay. Today we will be presenting about jazz, but not just any type of jazz. New Orleans jazz in particular, the most original form of jazz. New Orleans jazz is a unique form of jazz compared to other forms of jazz, and we'll explain to you why.
Jazz was a type of music developed by African American slaves of the early 19th century. When a lot of African Americans learned to play European instruments, but a lot of jazz played was for dancing, not for listening. Jazz originally came out of the blues and has developed into many different types of jazz and other genres.
Of New Orleans jazz. New Orleans was where jazz first originated, starting with Dixieland jazz. The video you just saw was a band playing original Dixieland jazz. In New Orleans and Chicago, beginning around 1917, musicians began to play the first Dixieland jazz, which incorporated earlier musical styles into it, such as blues and ragtime. Jazz developed later than New Orleans jazz and was found in clubs all over New York City, especially at 52nd Street, the so-called birthing place of New York jazz. As you could probably tell from the video, New York jazz sounds more modern and is used a lot today. Jazz clubs are still very popular in New York, and this jazz affected song music. Jazz, soloists became more important. Also, the first jazz musicians were employed by the Chicago mob to play music for the mob's other affairs, such as gambling and prostitution. Chicago jazz is very similar to New Orleans jazz, if not the same. It has the same Dixieland roots, but still focuses on more complex music.
New Orleans jazz, aka Dixieland jazz, was the original style of jazz, which incorporated many wind instruments with other instruments such as piano, guitar, drums, etc. New Orleans jazz came out of French quadrille, which is French square dancing, ragtime, and blues. New Orleans jazz is a type of music that is commonly played with swing dancers. Swing dance is a type of dance with a lot of changing paces. Since a lot of jazz is improv, so is a lot of swing. And just like jazz, swing has many other variations to it as well. A lot of New Orleans street bands go out and just play for a loose change. They don't all have a certain number of band members, nor do they have a certain instruments that they play. Each band is unique in their own way. However, they do have at least one person dancing during their music.
Jazz bands have many different contrasting instruments. The most important instrument in a jazz band is a wind instrument, which can either be a trumpet, cornet, clarinet, saxophone, or trombone. These wind instruments provide melody, while guitars, double basses, drums, and pianos usually provide the rhythm.
The big reason why a lot of times jazz never sounds the same is because musicians would improvise. Jazz and improvisation has been defined as going hand in hand. Improv was a way for jazz musicians and swing dancers to come up with new ideas on the spot. Louis Armstrong was a very famous Dixieland jazz musician. He got inspired by the musicians who played at Storyville, the prostitution district. For most of his life, he was self-taught. He got married off to his 3-year-old second cousin. Louis Armstrong had many hits, including Hello Dolly, What a Wonderful World, and When Saints Go Marching In.
The Excelsior Brass Band was one of the earliest recognized jazz bands in New Orleans. It was founded in 1879 by Theogene Backett, who led it until 1904 when George Morris took over. The band was fairly large for a jazz band and usually had 10 to 12 members. It existed as a popular jazz band until 1931.
The Bolden Band was founded by Buddy Bolden and was said to be the first jazz band with brass instruments. What Bolden would do is take music that he has heard by ear and adapt it to his horns, in order to create this new sound of ragtime and world blues. The bolden songs were Careless Love, Get Out of Here and Go, and Home Sweet Home. Let's see. Jazz has influenced many different genres, from swing to traditional jazz, to rock and roll to bebop. Jazz has influenced many different types of music greatly. Although jazz is an older form of music, jazz is still a very big part of our society today. In terms of jazz, jazz is one of the most diverse musical genres. Over the years, jazz style has expanded to many different types of jazz and into a way of life. Jazz is often used as a term of describe something that has been modified with something doing with jazz, aka jazz style.
Jazz has changed a lot today to be faster paced and incorporating more pop-like lyrics. There are very few traditional jazz artists today, but some that come to mind are Billy Elliot's Swing Orchestra, Eddie Reed, George G., and the Sultans of Swing. These bands incorporate many jazz-like qualities in their music. We'd like to thank the following for our image sources. I also like to thank the Random Street Band playing at Jackson Square, Take 5 Jazz Band in New York, and Blue Nights Chicago Jazz Band. Also thanks to the Winsmith and Croce Jazz Bar for pictures that we took.